Part 3: Rituals. Rituals are an outward expression of an inner meaning. In other words, they are symbolic. The rituals that we are talking about are more than daily routines. They are sacred or solemn acts. When I was preparing for my own temple initiation ritual, I was told that there would be symbols that I would have to interpret. In my naivety, I thought there might be ancient inscriptions that one could only interpret by inspiration from God. There was also the thought that one might actually see God, since the temple is called the house of the Lord. After the initiation and endowment rituals, my brother asked me if I found them to be strange. To me, they were not. After all, I had been baptized at 8 and then by proxy for the dead many times throughout my teenage years. Like the temple rituals, the baptisms were performed in symbolic white clothing, one of the same hand signs was given, and in both cases I was making covenants with God. Oaths and covenants are common to most initiatic traditions, usually for the purposes of secrecy and binding members to the organization, and the later accompanying obligations. This usually includes the commitment of one's time, money, and efforts. So why do people make such solemn oaths? For some, rituals are for legitimacy. They think that joining an order will make them respected as part of an authentic line of succession. The claim is almost always towards some ancient source. For others, the hope is that, by a sort of miraculous magic, and without effort, the ritual will intrinsically give them power. A secret word or magic spell that will somehow give them an advantage. For many, the case is that rituals are simply a part of their particular church or fraternity, so they go through them to fit in and stay in their comfort zone. Others believe that certain rituals are essential for salvation. It may be out of fear, the belief that if one does not receive this or that outward ordinance, he or she will be damned to hell and never be eligible for heaven or exaltation. This view has caused some to view rituals as a means of brainwashing and subjugating followers. Others hope that their participation in rituals will aid them on the path to enlightenment. They search for light and knowledge because knowledge is power. This knowledge is not for self-aggrandizement, but for wisdom to help uplift one's fellow beings and the whole of humanity. It is this group of thinkers that I have searched for, and these are my principal reasons for joining various groups and participating in their rituals. Many claims about the usefulness of rituals have been made throughout time, ranging from the ability to call down rain, to fighting demons in the spirit realm, or contacting a loved one who has passed away. At the very least, the unusual aspects of rituals leave a strong and lasting impression on the human psyche. At most, they provide the keys to become a god. Chapter 36: Temples. Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? Paul. Many rituals take place in or on buildings that have been dedicated for sacred purposes. These buildings are often called temples. The word temple, from the Latin templum, means a place cut off or set apart as sacred. When a permanent structure is not available, a place may be set apart through certain formulae in order to perform a ritual or rite. Such was the case when the Hebrews set up the tabernacle of the congregation during their 40-year wanderings. The Agur priests of Rome were known to do this as well. Various occultists also set up altars to create a space for rituals and rites. Those who choose not to use a human-built shrine of some sort often dedicate a sacred grove in nature for their rituals. Some groups, such as the Mormons, distinguish between meeting houses or churches from temples. In such cases, the temple is where sacred rituals are performed. Freemasons use the word temple and lodge interchangeably. Many orders require membership to enter their temples. Others, such as Hindus, do not. Non-Muslims are not allowed to even get near the Kaaba. But shrines, such as the Lincoln Memorial, are public. An inscription at the memorial reads, "In this temple, as in the hearts of the people for whom he saved the Union, the memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever." House of the Lord. There was a time when the gods lived in the temples. The Sumerians wrote about the palaces that the various gods ruled from. Each city had a tutelary deity to which the people would bring meat, bread, and beer. The gods gave them tools and knowledge for building and agriculture, and the people in return worked for the gods. In fact, both the Hebrew and Sumerian word for prayer is ovad, which means to work for, or to serve. Thus, when we read of an ancient priest praying to God in a temple, he was working for that God. The name Obadiah, Ovadyah, was given to various temple workers in the Old Testament and has been translated as slave of Yahweh. Likewise, the common Arabic name Abdullah, like Muhammad's father, also means slave of Allah. The biblical Yahweh and the Quranic Allah are the same God. Apparently, the gods enjoyed having lavish homes built for them and hearty meals served to them. Detailed instructions were given to the builders of Yahweh's temple, from what perfumes to use to what should be plated in gold, even the eating utensils. Equally detailed were his requests for buttered bread and cake offerings, where to wash and put on an apron before barbecuing the meat, and for wine to wash it down. The Hebrews did not use the word temple. When we read temple in the Old Testament, it should be rendered palace or hall. The two first temples in Jerusalem were called Beit Yahweh, Yahweh's house. Following the King James translation of the Bible, the LDS Church inscribes the words, "Holiness to the Lord, the house of the Lord," on the east side of all their temples. Similarly, the Kaaba is known to Muslims as Bait Allah, house of God. The Mesopotamians and Hebrews were not the only ones to write about gods living in palaces from which they ruled. The stories span the earth, as do their remains. The earth is littered with many ancient pyramidal structures and temples which housed the gods. Temples were built on flat, elevated surfaces like the Temple Mount in Jerusalem and the Parthenon in Athens, above the city where the gods could land their craft and rule. Grecian temples were built on hills and outcroppings. We call them citadels. On flat regions like Egypt and Central America, flat-topped pyramids were constructed as landing pads and energy sources in a temple complex. One such temple is mentioned in the Popol Vuh. Quote, "Hakavits was left on top of a great firehouse. Hakavits is the name of the mountain today. This they made their citadel, and this was where their god's dwelling came to be. It was not in the forest that Hakavits dwelt, but rather it was on a cleared mountain." End quote. A time came when the gods abandoned these earthly palaces, but the sites continued to be revered and used for religious ceremonies. Presumably, the rituals were given to the priests and priestesses from the gods themselves. Appearance. When it comes to the construction of LDS temples, no expense is spared. They may not be as magnificent as Solomon's temple was, but they follow the same pattern of importing precious materials to build them. They symbolically face the east. They have 3 levels as types of the 3 heavens or degrees of glory. The subterranean level is used for baptismal ordinances, where one is symbolically buried and born again. The ground floor is for initiatories, and the upper level has rooms where a dramatization of creation is shown. A veil separates these rooms from the celestial room, which is ornate with chandeliers and furniture. Rooms for sealing ordinances are also on this floor, as well as a room called the Holy of Holies. Jewish temples were divided into 3 parts as well. After passing the area for non-Jews, then the area for women and lepers, A priest would enter the priest's court, where purification rituals of washing and sacrifices were performed. Then one enters the holy place, where a menorah is lit, ritual bread is present, and an altar for incense. The third priestly location, called the Holy of Holies, was a cubicle room behind a veil or curtain. It was reserved for the high priest and housed the Ark of the Covenant. The Jewish temples also faced the east. There was the tabernacle of the congregation that the Israelites used during the Exodus, then King Solomon's temple for Yahweh in Jerusalem. Solomon had other temples erected to other gods, and they had the same floor plan. After Solomon's temple was destroyed, there was a second temple built on the same spot. A third temple was built called King Herod's temple, which Jesus held sacred enough to drive out the money changers. As Jesus predicted, the veil of the temple was torn upon his crucifixion. All but the west wall of Herod's temple was destroyed, and today the Islamic Dome of the Rock stands in its place. The Dome of the Rock has an 8-sided base with the Byzantine-style dome on top. It is a pilgrimage site for Muslims, as is the Kaaba in Mecca. The Kaaba is a cubic shrine that was appropriated by Islam from the ancient Arabic religion. It housed images of the gods. The southern Kaaba, called Dhul Khalasa, was destroyed. Hindu temples also face the rising sun god Surya in the east, and they follow a pattern of 3 main elements. The design is called Vatu Purusha Mandala, meaning dwelling universal essence circle. The base of the temple is perfectly square and encompassed by a circle. Beneath the central square is a cubic space for Purusha, the universal essence. Above the circle square essence is a dome that is called Vimana in southern India. It bears the same name as the flying vehicles of the gods. Usually an image of one of the gods is located near the Purusha space, and worshippers can give offerings to the god. It is there that one hopes to receive a sight of knowledge or a vision called darshana. The circle and square are symbols of perfection. The square represents divine knowledge, and the circle represents the earthly. In contrast, the circle and square symbolism of Masonic temples has the square as the symbol for worldly perfection, and the circle, made by a compass, as spiritual perfection. Mormon temples use the compass and square as symbols of righteousness. Circling the square is an idea in many occult societies, and illustrated in Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. But, of course, the builders of ancient Hindu temples used these geometric philosophical symbols thousands of years earlier. Larger temples have an outer layer with images of wrathful beings, followed by a layer with images of human endeavors, and the inner area depicting the benevolent gods. Northern temples have a sanctum sanctorum, or Holy of Holies. The repeated concentric squares and circles that make up the vaults go from big to small as a symbol of the macrocosm and the microcosm, a teaching built into the architecture that illustrates the interconnection between the spiritual and the physical. It also represents the center of the cosmos, called Mount Meru, where the creation of our universe began. Worshippers circumambulate the temple and its central Purusha in a clockwise direction as a star rotating around a galactic center. The walk around the temple is called Pradakshina. Walking in a circle around a square is also done by Muslims at the Kaaba, Masons and Wiccans around an altar, and Mormons form a prayer circle around a square altar in their temples. The spire or dome of a Hindu temple represents a pyramid, a mountain, and the primordial mound. The same symbolism is found in the pyramids of Egypt. Each pyramid has a perfectly square base that aligns with the cardinal directions. Each rising layer of masonry adds a smaller square until they reach a central peak that represents the primordial mound, known to Egyptians as Benben. The Great Pyramid of Giza also has 3 levels. There are the subterranean lower chamber. Above that is a room now called the Queen's Chamber, where a shaft looks out at the star Sirius at times. Above that is the king's chamber, which contains a granite coffer that was used for a death and rebirth ritual. The king's chamber also has a shaft directed toward the belt of Orion. Giza's three large pyramids are a mirror image of the three stars of Orion's belt. The Sphinx would have faced the rising of the constellation Leo on the spring equinox in 10,500 BCE. The west side of the LDS Temple in Salt Lake City has a relief of the Big Dipper, and the last two stars direct one to the North Star in the sky, just as the actual stars do. It also has spires that symbolize ascension to heaven. The pyramids of Mesoamerica and China also have astrological alignments and symbology. Other Egyptian temples, like the Temple of Amun, have large gate entrances called pylons, with religious relief sculptures and paintings, a courtyard with rows of pillars, and a chapel with a statue of the god where offerings would be made. The rows of columns are found at other pyramid temple complexes like Chichen Itza. Chichen Itza also has an ancient observatory that was used to track the stars. Egyptian fertility and agricultural rituals would start with the sacred temple rituals, theatrical reenactments, and processions from one temple to another. The Pawnee of North America erected religious lodges that symbolize both the cosmos and a mother's womb. Observatory lodges had 4 posts, and the sides aligned with the cardinal directions. An opening in the roof would allow the morning sun of the spring equinox to shine on the altar. The smoke hole allowed observation of the Pleiades constellation. They also paid attention to the morning star in the east and the evening star in the west because they play a big part in their myths and rituals. Masonic and Rosicrucian temples, as well as a plethora of others like the OTO, Oddfellows, the Grange, Golden Dawn, Traditional Martinist Order, etc., all have a central altar and 4 stations, one in each of the cardinal directions, with the east being the most important. Greek and Roman temples were also adorned with columns, relief sculptures, an altar for sacrifice, and an image of the particular god of the temple. The Parthenon had 3 concentric rectangles of columns, each one a step up from the other, and a statue of Athena at the center of the temple. Greek temples also used veils and reflection pools. The Temple of Heaven, Tiantan, constructed around 1400 CE in Beijing, China, is a temple complex with circles and squares throughout the architecture as symbols of the connection of heaven and earth. A very large altar made of 3 layers of marble platforms is south of the Hall of Prayer, which has 3 levels. The emperor would fast, pray, abstain from meat, and give offerings on the winter solstice for a good harvest each year. East of the Hall of Prayer are 7 stones that represent the 7 peaks of Mount Tai and the 7 stars of the Big Dipper. The Temple of Heaven aligns with the cardinal directions, and the entire complex is in South Beijing. In East Beijing, the Temple of the Sun was built with stargates and a rectangular altar. In the west was the Temple of the Moon, and in the north, the Temple of the Earth. Angkor Wat is said to be the largest temple structure in the world. It was built 900 years ago in Cambodia as a Hindu temple to Vishnu. In later years, it was changed to a Buddhist temple. Buddhists and Jains use the same patterns in their temples as Hindus. Angkor Wat has 5 spires that represent the 5 peaks of Mount Meru, which I equate with the 5 arms of the Milky Way galaxy. Temples represent our universe as the macrocosm, and they also represent an individual human body as the microcosm. Paul taught that our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit. The 3 sections of the body are the legs, torso, and head. The head has the face, skull, and brain. The brain has the gray matter, priestly court, the thalamus, holy place, and the pineal gland, the Holy of Holies.